today's presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. We'll answer as many questions at the end as time allows. If we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterwards. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Let's get started. Rhonda, I will now hand things over to you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Hi, everyone. I am Rhonda Wright, Director of Product Development, and joining me today is Tanya Weaver, Compliance Manager. Today's discussion focuses on the intersection of mergers and acquisitions and retirement plans, an often overlooked but critically important area. Whether you're an advisor, a plan sponsor, or involved in HR or legal, this session will give you the strategic and practical tools to navigate the complexities. Next, please. Our goal today is to demystify what happens to retirement plans during a corporate transaction and what advisors and sponsors need to keep in mind to protect participants and reduce fiduciary and legal risk. We will review how to understand how M&A activity affects retirement plans, identify the risk, obligations, and opportunities, review due diligence best practices, define advisor and sponsor responsibilities, and prepare for post-transaction plan decisions. Next, please. It's important to understand the structure of a deal because it directly influences what happens to the retirement plans involved. Let's review M&A transactions. A merger is when companies combine to form a new entity, and an acquisition is when one company buys another. The most common deal structures are a stock purchase, and this is when liabilities, including retirement plan obligations, typically transfer to the buyer. An asset purchase is when the buyer may choose which liabilities to assume. While it's typically just the employees that are acquired, an asset acquisition could also include the plan. A merger of equals is when two companies of roughly the same size merge to create a new company, and existing shares are exchanged for new shares in the new company. And a spinoff is when a portion of the company is sold and results in the employees transferring, as well as that portion of the plan balances, including protected benefits. Next, please. So what happens to retirement plans in a transaction? There's really no one-size-fits-all approach. Decisions depend on legal, financial, and operational factors. Each path has unique compliance obligations, participant impacts, and timeline considerations. There are several potential options. You could terminate the acquired plan before the transaction. The seller would end the plan and distribute assets to the participants. The participants could then elect to roll over to the buyer's plan or to an IRA, or simply take the distribution and pay the applicable taxes and penalties. And in this approach, no plan liabilities would transfer to the buyer's plan. It's important to note, because of the successor plan rules, an acquired plan cannot be terminated after the acquisition. So if you want to terminate the plan, do it prior to the acquisition and include this provision in the buyer contract or agreement. You could merge plans, which would be combining the buyer and seller plans as permitted. And you need to watch out for plans with a safe harbor contribution, as the plans may not be permitted to merge mid-year. The merger of the plans may have to wait until the beginning of the next plan year. Maintain separate plans. You could continue operating both plans. This could be for a period of time, possibly until the end of the transition period, or indefinitely. You'll want to watch out for different plan provisions, which could cause an issue with passing coverage and compliance testing. In a spinoff of a portion of the plan, this would be where a division of the company is being sold, and the account balances and protected benefits of the plan would transfer to the buyer's plan. Next, please. There are several key considerations for buyers because buyers inherit a lot more than just assets and people. They may also be taking on fiduciary issues, funding shortfalls, or non-compliant plans. This is why thorough due diligence is so essential. During the negotiation process of the transaction, you'll want to make sure you review the seller's plan documents, compliance history, and protected benefits. A review of the current benefits of the participants is important, not only for how those benefits will change for the participants with the transaction, such as eligibility, contributions, and vesting, for example, but how protected benefits may change your acquisition strategy. Maybe you were thinking of a stock acquisition and acquiring the plan, but a review of the current plan reveals significant issues where you would want to require the plan terminate prior to the acquisition. You'll want to identify liabilities and funding obligations. For example, any outstanding contributions that have not been deposited for the past several years, and contributions that are required where those are not discretionary, but they're actually required to be deposited. Understand the historical errors of the plan, late filings, non-discrimination failures, for example, and the assumption of all compliance issue. Compliance items not corrected by the seller could be costly to you as the buyer. Evaluate the seller's service providers and fees. If the plan will continue to be maintained, not terminated or merged immediately, you want to discover about the record keeper, the TPA if applicable, and the associated services provided and those fees. You may want to consider transitioning the plan to your TPA if possible, since combined plan testing may also be required. Next, please. You may want to take advantage of the transition rules that allows the buyer and seller plans to remain separate. The transition period runs from the date of the transaction until the last day of the plan year following the year of the transaction. For example, if an employer with a calendar year plan acquires another entity in June of 2024, the transition period would run through December 31st, 2025. That means you would keep the plan separate for 2024 and 2025. The transition rules require the terms of the plan document must be followed, no amendments during the transition period, the employer sponsoring the plan may not change, and the same employer is paying compensation. If any of these events occur, the transition rules expire and the plans and demographics are treated as one employer and one plan for compliance testing. Next, please. Some companies in acquisition mode will have an acquisition strategy for each acquisition. This consistent approach allows for efficiency and reduces liability. Common acquisition strategies that we've seen are stock acquisitions where the plan is required to be terminated prior to the acquisition, asset acquisitions where the plan is not acquired, and stock acquisitions where the plan is acquired with a checklist of items to collect and have reviewed as part of the due diligence. Next slide. Now let's review the key considerations for sellers. From a seller's perspective, you want to show a clean, compliant plan that is well documented. This can enhance the deal value and simplify negotiations. Be ready for due diligence requests. Have your signed plan documents, documentation, testing, and filings in order well before any transaction is finalized. Decide whether to terminate or transition the plan. Negotiations and the purchase agreement may dictate this decision. You will also want to communicate to your participants about the change and the impact to the plan. Next, please. Participants are often left in the dark, yet they're the ones most directly affected. Advisors and sponsors should proactively manage communications around plan changes investment options, and what to expect after the deal closes. Common participant questions are, will the plan transfer or be terminated? Will I be eligible for a distribution? What happens to my account balance? Will vesting schedules change? How will the contributions change? Will there be a blackout period? Will deferrals continue to be withheld? Or will there be a time period in which deferrals are suspended? Will loan payments continue to be withheld? This one's very frequently overlooked. And also, clear communication is key. It's important that your participants understand what's happening to their account balances because it is very important to them personally. Now, I will turn this over to Tanya. Tanya, take it away.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. As the advisor, you may very well end up being in a position where you're the quarterback and it's beyond the investments. You're having to advise and help the plan sponsor navigate through this project while also managing participant outcomes and expectations. The client is going to be looking for guidance, especially if this is their first M&A experience. And the client will look for assistance in due diligence and integration to help evaluate whether a plan should be terminated before purchase, or if it's ideal to merge those two plans together, to coordinate with your legal, HR, finance, and payroll providers, and involve the record keeper and TPA, and monitor fiduciary compliance throughout. Next slide, please. The M&A process involves numerous parties all getting on the same page. There's advisors, record keepers of both the buyer and seller plans if they both have a plan. There'll be TPAs, again, on both sides, the buyer and seller, potentially multiple payroll providers, and then any legal counsel that's involved. And then who are the points of contact who are going to be driving this M&A project? A lot of times that's one of the harder things to dig down into, is to find the people in these companies that are going to be the person that's going to drive this project from the beginning to the end. Typically, it's going to be an individual that is going to be on the buyer's team. It's important to bring all the parties together as soon as possible when you become aware of an acquisition or a merger. Recommend that you immediately start having meetings that are weekly and bi-weekly. This way, all parties may meet to understand who's responsible for what roles, what are the timeline restrictions, such as setting up or terminating a contract, plan document review and merger agreements, and any advanced participant notices like blackout and safe harbor notices. The other reason why it's a really good idea to bring everyone together is each one of the service providers is going to have their own laundry list of information that they're going to need and their documents that are going to have to be signed and executed. And bringing everyone together in the beginning of the project, all this information can be shared so that the client has a better experience of not having to repeat the same information over and over again to different service providers. Of all of the players that are going to be involved in this process, the advisor, TPA, and record keeper are probably at the heart of this process and should all be kept in the loop at the same time. They will partner together to move the project forward, and often the record keeper will look to the TPA for a core set of information before a transition coordinator is even assigned to the plan. So keeping these parties together will be instrumental in meeting the client's timeline expectations. Next slide, please. Not only is responding timely and bringing all parties together important, but knowing what to ask is critical. As Rhonda has already shared in the beginning of the slide, there are so many different nuances, and each project really is its individual nuanced project. It's going to have its own needs depending upon if there's retirement plans involved, what will the plans end up looking like at the end. So at the beginning of the process, it is very important to ask the critical questions. What is the legal structure of the acquisition? Is it an asset or a stock sale? If it's an asset sale, what parts did that buyer buy? Did they buy the retirement plan? And as Rhonda mentioned, in the stock sale, the buyer has assumed all the liabilities and assets. Does the buyer or seller sponsor a retirement plan? And if so, will those plans merge, or will the seller's plan be terminated? And again, if it's a stock sale where the buyer has assumed that liability, there's going to be an issue with terminating the seller's plan to avoid any plan successor rules. And then in the plan merge, it's really great to have that conversation ahead of time, letting the buyer and the buyer know that, okay, you have this plan and you own it now. And if you follow these rules, you're going to have a transition period to be able to make adjustments. And then in a year and a half or a couple of years, because it's the plan year after the plan you're following, then they'll be able to make that decision of what that final plan is going to look like, or if they want those two plans to stay independent. It's good to find out who's going to be reviewing the plan documents to determine if there's any rights, benefits, and features violations, and then who will be the service providers after the merge, and more importantly, who's going to be in the driver's seat of communicating to participants and advising on any new product. Next slide, please. So by all the questions that need to be asked, and the previous list is just a small sample of questions to start the process, it's very easy to have items overlooked. Even seasoned teams can fall into these types of traps. Plans can't always be merged or terminated without consequence. You'll always need to look beyond 401ks as well. Legacy DB and non-qualified plans, if a plan sponsor has sponsored those plans, those limits and contributions stay with that plan for the existence of that company. So knowing any of those legacy issues will become very important. A plan cannot always terminate and create a new plan. So the strategy may be to merge or to modify the existing plan. And then as Rhonda had indicated, maybe the decision is we're going to operate these two plans alone, or we're going to take our time, look through these plans, and wait till after the transition rules, and then we'll bring those plans together. So the most common pitfall, though, that we see in that transition rule is that the seller will move the employees to the new payroll company. And by doing that, they've actually changed the employer on the seller's plan, and that would be deemed as a major modification. And then the transition rules expired, and now those two plans have to be treated as one under the controlled group rules. And another common pitfall that is overlooked is to continue salary deferrals and loan payments. For whatever reasons, either a payroll system is not established, or perhaps the new contract is still onboarding, deferrals and loan payments stop. They either stop being deducted in payroll, or they're no longer being transmitted to the record keeper. If this issue arises, there are several options to help mitigate, but what we most commonly see is opening up a separate bank account in the name of the plan to fund those contributions so they're still being made on a timely basis, or knowingly going into the transition that there's going to be a couple of weeks or a month where deposits are simply going to be late and a lost interest calculation will need to be executed. The key on the deferrals and the loan payments is to follow the terms of the plan document and the election forms that are on file. Next slide, please. So sometimes the pitfalls can turn out to be opportunities. So this is a very brief example of a real life situation where there wasn't a lot of due diligence prior to the acquisition, and the buyer bought this plan, and the plan that they bought had a bunch of late deposits. And the advisor was able to step in, put on his cape and boots, and he swooped in, helped the client identify the issues, get them corrected, and alleviate and avoid any IRS sanctions. So knowing more about the M&A process gives an opportunity for you to come in and assist that client and solidify those relationships. Next slide, please. Once the merge has occurred and all the service providers are determined, that's really when the real work begins. There needs to be a streamline and consolidation of providers, aligning plan design and features, reevaluating investment lineup and fees, and then updating fiduciary oversight and processes. Ideally, it would be wonderful if we were able to come into the process and have all of these items in line prior to the actual merge, but a lot of times it's happening after the post-merge. But these are the processes and the things that are going to happen during the post-merge. Next slide. So if you partner with a fiduciary partner, that can be incredibly helpful during the M&A transition. In this brief conversation that we've already had, you can see that there are many moving parts to an M&A transition. And when you have a 316 fiduciary partner, they can help and provide technical expertise. They can reduce workloads for internal teams, and they can help ensure that both compliance and participant issues are protected. They can minimize fiduciary risk by reviewing plan documents prior to the acquisition for protected benefits. And when a merger is recommended, Integra will work with legal counsel of a plan sponsor to determine if corrections will be needed. And we also have a specialized consulting team that can be engaged to execute those corrections. And if there's a merger where we have a no issues, clean merger, we have our Integra has account managers, and we have a client transition team that will be engaged to facilitate this transition. Next slide, please. So the takeaway here is somewhat simple, that retirement plans in the buy-seller agreement, they really are one of the last considerations. I've been doing this administration and been involved in plans for 25 years, and probably half of the merger and acquisition projects that I'm pulled in on, they've happened 6 months or a year ago. So if you can get in front of them before the buyer sells on the dotted line, that is really ideal. But it takes time to plan and execute the objectives of any project. Just the plan merge itself, the notification, the plan documents, the record keeper updates, and actual asset transfer typically take about 3 to 4 months. And that's if everything's moving at a normal ongoing pace and doesn't have a lot of speed bumps along the way. So ignoring the retirement plan can create costly consequences. they've already signed the purchase, maybe they've already taken the employees and they've moved them to the new payroll. The transition rules are gone. Both the plans now have to be tested together. So if the plan sponsors and advisors are working together, pulling in all the service providers and taking a strategic, proactive approach, it will really help protect themselves and better serve the participants. Next slide, please. So we wanted to leave some time for questions, and I am going to hand it back to Lizzie and see if we can address them.
Great, thank you so much. We did receive a question. Does Pentegra have a process to handle M&A?
Rhonda, do you want to address that?
Yeah, hi, it's Rhonda. We do. We have a process in play during the onboarding process, which our client transition team manages. Sometimes it gets frustrating because we will ask, it feels like 1,000 questions, but it's all those important questions that we ask so that we know how to actually onboard the plan properly while maintaining the compliance and protecting, everyone that's involved. We do involve our account managers as well. So if a plan is already out of client transition, it's being serviced by our account manager team. That team also has a process when they're notified of an acquisition. And they work sometimes hand in hand with client transition as well, even though the plan is live with them, because client transition will facilitate the setup, transition of assets, whatever is required in order to keep the ongoing plans going in the way that they should be and following the right path.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.